In this lesson, I want to explain about the CSS3 Media Queries module, which allows you to specify rules for different devices through simple queries about the device's features, such as screen width, device width, color depth, and orientation. I'm sure you're familiar with the media attribute, which lets you specify which types of devices should use your style rules. For example, when linking a style sheet to a web page, adding media equals screen tells browsers that these styles are intended primarily for color computer screens, whereas adding media equals print tells them that the styles are for printers only. Media queries expand on this, allowing you not only to specify the media type, but also to set conditions such as minimum or maximum screen width. This means you can optimize your sites for different devices, sending one set of style rules to desktop computers and other rules to mobile phones and tablets. You set the conditions using one or more media features. This lists some of the most common ones. You can prefix most media features with min or max to indicate minimum or maximum values. For example, in addition to width, you can specify min width or max width to specify the minimum and maximum width. As you can see from this table, in addition to width and height, media features include device width and device height. In the case of desktop or laptop computers, the difference is clear. Width and height refer to the dimensions of the browser viewport, whereas device width and device height are the overall size of the screen. With mobile devices, the distinction is not so clear-cut. Most smartphones and tablets use width and height to mean the physical dimensions of the screen, and device width and device height to represent a notional viewport. For example, the iPhone and iPod Touch have a screen that's 320 pixels wide, but the notional viewport has a default width of 980 pixels. To complicate matters further, Android devices take orientation into consideration when reporting width and height. Apple considers height to refer to the device's height in portrait mode. Specifying media queries is quite simple. You specify the value for a media feature after a colon, in the same way as you do for a CSS property. Each condition is wrapped in parentheses and added to the media declaration using the keyword AND. It's also advised to add the only keyword at the beginning to hide the media queries from older browsers that don't understand them. You can also add multiple conditions like this. So the second media query targets screens that are between 361 pixels and 768 pixels. Anything outside that range, the styles won't apply. Media queries can also be used with @ rules. For example, to use a media query with import, you add it like this. The syntax is exactly the same. The only difference is that the media query is not enclosed in quotes when using @import. You can also use media queries with @media rules inside your style sheets. In this example, the header h1 style rule is applied only to screens that are no wider than 360 pixels. As you can see from this table on caniuse.com, media queries are supported by most browsers, including those on mobile devices. The fly in the ointment is Internet Explorer. Although the latest versions support media queries, IE 6, 7 and 8 don't. But this isn't a major problem, as long as you remember to serve a set of basic rules that are recognized by all browsers. The real value of media queries lies in being able to target specific rules at smartphones and tablets. This website for a fictional hotel uses a 980-pixel fixed-width layout. So it looks fine on desktop and laptop computers, but it needs to be optimized for display on mobile phones and tablets. The first stage in optimizing the CSS is to create style sheets that use media queries to control the delivery of styles to different devices. Dreamweaver CS55 employs a technique known as a site-wide media queries file. The role of this file is to import styles from other style sheets using a series of @import rules and media queries. This avoids the need to link to each style sheet with media queries in every page. You just link to the site-wide media queries file and it imports the relevant style rules. You'll soon see how it works. If you haven't already done so, open index.html in the Tozai Hotel Begin folder. Before creating the site-wide media queries file, you need to detach the existing style sheet. So select the style sheet in the All mode of the CSS Styles panel and click the trash icon at the bottom right to unlink the style sheet. The page is now completely unstyled, but that'll be fixed in a few minutes. You create the site-wide media queries file through the Media Queries dialog box. There are several ways to open the dialog box in Dreamweaver CS5.5, but I think the most convenient is to go to the Modify menu and select Media Queries. With the dialog box open, click the Specify button at the top of the dialog box. This opens a dialog box where you specify the site-wide media query file. You can either use an existing file or create a new file. I don't have one, so I'm going to select Create New File and then click this folder icon and go to the Styles folder in my site. I'm going to call this one tozai_MQ CSS and click Save and click OK to close that dialog box. Then you need to select this radio button and that makes it the site-wide media queries file. And this message that's lit up here tells you that the details of the site-wide media queries file are held in the Advanced Settings section of the Site Setup dialog box. So if you want to remove the site-wide media queries file or change it to a different file, you need to go into the Site Setup dialog box. This checkbox, labelled Force Devices to Report Actual Width, is selected by default. What it does is automatically insert a special meta tag into each page attached to the site-wide media queries file and sets the width of the viewport to device width. This avoids problems with mobile devices reporting the wrong width and rescaling your pages. So that's exactly what you want, so leave that checkbox selected. The bottom half of the Media Queries dialog box is where you specify which style sheets to attach with media queries. Now you can do this manually by clicking this plus button here and adding various files, but I find it much quicker to use the default presets and then to adjust them. Selecting the defaults populates the area at the bottom of the dialog box with suggested values for mobile phones, tablets and desktop. The Properties section at the bottom of the dialog box lets you change any of the values for min width and max width. I'm going to change the max width for the phone to 400 pixels. I then need to attach my CSS file. I don't have one, so Create New File is correct. Click the folder icon and then go to the Styles folder. Now you'll notice that the Tozai MQ CSS file that I created before isn't listed here. That's nothing to worry about. In fact, none of the files will be listed until you exit the Media Queries dialog box. Dreamweaver creates them all at the end of the process. So for the phones, I want to create a file called phone CSS. Click Save, and then change the properties for tablet. I've made max width of phone 400 pixels, so I need to make the min width for the tablet style sheet 401 pixels. I don't have a file, so I just select Create New File, then click the folder icon, go to the Styles folder, and create a file called Tablet CSS. Save. And finally, desktop. I don't need to make any changes to the properties, but I do need to create a new file. Back to the Styles folder and call this one Desktop CSS and save. And those are all the changes that need to be made in the Media Queries dialog box. So just click OK and you'll see that Dreamweaver has now attached Tozai MQ CSS to my page. Save both files by going to File, Save All Related Files. And let's have a look at the site-wide media queries file that has been created. It's got 3 @import rules, one for phone CSS, for tablet CSS and for desktop CSS, together with the media queries which have been automatically created by Dreamweaver. Now, because old browsers like Internet Explorer 6, 7 and 8 don't recognize media queries, I need to import the original style sheet at the beginning of this file without a media query. I've put it at the beginning because the style rules in the style sheets which are using media queries will override some of the basic rules. So I'll save that again and click inside Design View, and you now see that the site is restored to its former glory. Let's take a quick look at the HTML source code, and you can see that Dreamweaver has added this meta viewport tag in the head of the page and set content to width equals device width. This ensures that mobile devices respect the width definitions in your media queries. Also, you can see that the site-wide media queries file has been linked to the page, but if I open this here, you can see that the others are imported directly and they're now listed here in the Related Files toolbar. But if I open Phone CSS and the others, you'll see that they're all blank. They need to be filled in as the project advances. After defining the site-wide media queries file for the first page, adding it to other pages is very easy. Let's just open another page. And I'll remove the existing style sheet. Then go to Modify, Media Queries. And the media queries file is already listed there, so I just need to select this radio button and click OK. And you can see that what Dreamweaver has done is it's added that viewport meta tag and has linked the media queries file. You need to do the same on the 3 other pages in the site, but I'll leave you to do that on your own. So that's how you create a site-wide media queries file in Dreamweaver CS5.5. Mobile devices often have slower internet connections, and many data plans impose a limit on the amount of bandwidth that can be used without incurring extra charges. So it's important to prevent assets from being downloaded unnecessarily. For example, embedded fonts take up bandwidth and don't always look very good on mobile devices, so it's a good idea to hide them from phones and tablets. So I'm going to open the original style sheet, which serves basic styles to all devices, including mobile devices. I'm going to select the @font_face rule and cut it to my clipboard, Ctrl+X on Windows, Command+X on a Mac, and switch to the desktop CSS style sheet and paste that font face rule in there. Looking at the site-wide media queries file, you can see that desktop CSS has a media query that ensures that those styles are served only to devices which have a minimum width of 769 pixels. So in other words, they won't be seen by mobile phones or most tablet devices. Another important consideration is what to do with background images. Simply setting the display property of a background image to none only hides it. It doesn't prevent the image from being downloaded. So if you're using a different size background image for mobile devices or none at all, you need to create separate definitions and use media queries to ensure that the correct version is served to each device, depending on its screen width. For example, this image of the hotel is a background image, and I'm going to use a different size background image for tablets and not display it at all on mobile phones. So I need to have the style rule for the background image for this particular page, one in the desktop, another one in tablet, and then none at all in the style sheet for mobile phones. Also, the background image to the banner at the top here, I'm going to use different sizes for desktop, tablet and mobile phone. So let's go into the basic style sheet and look for the background image definitions. Here's the background image for the banner. So I need to cut that to my clipboard and go to the desktop style sheet. Now the background image was in the wrapper style rule, so I need to create another wrapper style rule here in desktop CSS and paste the details of the background image. And you can see that the background image has disappeared in Design View. That's because we're using media queries and because Design View is narrower than 769 pixels. If I expand Design View, it comes back. So you can now see the media queries in action. Now the background image for the hotel is in a style rule which is called Hero. So there it is, background image. Cut it to my clipboard, go to the desktop style sheet, and again create a new style rule for hero in desktop. CSS, paste it. And again you can see that the image has now disappeared, expanded again, and it comes back. So Dreamweaver's design view is reacting dynamically to the changes in the style sheets because I'm using media queries. Let's go back into the basic style sheet and check for more background images. Now there's a background image here in the dining style rule, but I'm going to use the same image in all devices, so I don't need to move that one. Now this next rule has got a background image, the sake rule, but I'm not only going to have a different image in the tablet layout, the complete layout is different in the tablet, and it won't be there at all in the design for mobile phones. So I'm going to cut this entire style rule and paste it as it is in the desktop style sheet. And let's just check the main style sheet again. In the next style rule there is a background image for Blossom, but it's a very tiny image. It's only 8 kilobytes. It's purely decorative, and it's actually used in all layouts, so you can leave this style rule as it is. So just go to Save and save all related files. The fonts and background images have now been reorganized so that mobile devices won't download any assets they don't need. This media query in the site-wide media queries file hides desktop CSS from devices with screens less than 769 pixels wide. The problem is that Internet Explorer 6, 7 and 8 can't see desktop CSS either because they don't understand media queries. To solve this problem, you need to attach desktop CSS to each page in the normal way and then wrap the link in an Internet Explorer conditional comment. The Dreamweaver Snippets panel doesn't have a conditional comment that covers all 3 versions of Internet Explorer, but it only takes a few moments to adapt an existing snippet. So let's get to work. First switch to source code so we can see what's happening in the underlying HTML markup, and then go to Format, CSS Styles, Attach Style Sheet. And I need to browse to the desktop CSS style. Click OK. And there Dreamweaver has inserted a link for the desktop CSS after the site-wide media queries file. We now need to wrap that link in an Internet Explorer conditional comment so that it's hidden from all browsers except Internet Explorer 6, 7 and 8. Now open the Snippets panel. In the setup that I've got here, it's this little icon. But if you haven't set it up like that, go to Window and then Snippets to open it, and expand the Comments folder. Select the if less than IE8 conditional comment snippet. Right-click and select Edit from the context menu. This opens the existing snippet ready for editing, and change the name to less than or equal to IE8 conditional comment. Then amend the description so that it reads if the browser version is less than or equal to Internet Explorer 8. And the only thing that you need to do in the snippet itself is to click just to the right of the LT and change that to LTE. So what that stands for is less than or equal to. In other words, this snippet will apply an Internet Explorer conditional comment to browsers that are less than or equal to Internet Explorer 8, which basically means Internet Explorer 6, 7 and 8. That's all that you need to do. Just click OK. Now that you've got a snippet ready, just select that link to desktop CSS and open the Snippets panel if necessary. Select the conditional comment and either click the Insert button down at the bottom or just double-click. and that wraps the link tag in the Internet Explorer conditional comment, hiding it from all browsers except Internet Explorer 6, 7 and 8. You now need to copy that conditional comment and the nested link and paste it into the same position in all the other pages. I'll just show you in one of the pages. So just before the closing head tag, and paste that Internet Explorer conditional comment. It's a nuisance having to attach desktop CSS twice like this, but it's essential to prevent files from being downloaded unnecessarily by mobile devices. And although desktop CSS is attached twice, browsers download it only once. Those browsers that recognize media queries import desktop CSS through the site-wide media queries file. Only Internet Explorer 6, 7 and 8 use the link that you've just wrapped in a conditional comment. In this video, I'm going to start optimizing the styles for the Torzai Hotel website for tablet devices. In my experiments, I found that the iPad handled embedded fonts without difficulty, but the Samsung Galaxy Tab and HTC Desire failed to render them correctly. So what I'm going to do is to use an @media rule to limit the use of embedded fonts to screens that are at least 700 pixels wide. And that'll exclude things like the Samsung Galaxy Tab and HTC Desire. It's far from ideal, but media queries can't identify individual devices or the level of support they offer for fonts, so working on the basis of width is a good compromise. I've currently got the font definitions in desktop CSS, so I'll just open that in split view and copy the @fontface rule and then paste it in the tablet CSS style sheet. Now these first two definitions use the EOT, Embedded Open Type font format. That's only used by Internet Explorer, and Internet Explorer 9 supports WOFF, which is the Web Open Font Format. So we can get rid of these EOT definitions by selecting them there. And deleting them. Now, to prevent tablets with screens less than 700 pixels wide from using these fonts, I need to wrap that in an @media rule. So insert a little line there, @media, and then screen, followed by my media query, min width 700 pixels, and everything needs to go inside a pair of curly braces. Just to make the styles a bit more readable, I'll add a little bit of indentation there, and a curly brace needs to go at the end. And so this @media rule with its media query ensures that the @fontface rule is seen only by devices that have a minimum width of 700 pixels. Now, to see the effect of further changes that I'm going to make, I want to give myself a bit more room. So I'm going to collapse that to icons and even collapse it further, and then turn on Live View and go into the Window Sizes menu by clicking the down arrow next to the multi-screen button and selecting 768 by 1024 tablet. And that gives me a view of what it will look like in a tablet. That fixed width is being inherited from the basic style rules in the Torzai CSS style sheet. Unlike the fixed width layout for desktops, the tablet layout needs to be flexible. So let's create a rule in the tablet style sheet for wrapper. And I'm going to make the width 100%. But to stop things going crazy, I want to make it a maximum width of 700 pixels. Then a background image Go to the images folder, and we have background BG tab, which is 700 pixels by 191. And finally add background size and set it to contain. Let's click in Live View to refresh the page. If it doesn't refresh, just toggle Live View on and off. The page is looking a bit of a mess now, but at least we've got the background to the banner there. The reason I've used background size contain is because I'm using a liquid layout, 100% with a maximum width of 700 pixels. So if the tablet is smaller, what background size contain does is it will shrink that image so that it still fits and maintains its aspect ratio. Now obviously the heading needs to be changed, so I'll create a quick star rule for that and refresh. It's not refreshing very nicely for me. There we go. So what I've done is I've changed the font size, I'm aligning the text in the center, and I've given it no padding on the left but some on the top, and that will work quite nicely in a liquid layout. Now let's fix this navigation menu. Create a rule for it, nav, and give it a width of 660 pixels. I'm going to have a fixed width. And set margin left to auto and margin right to auto. By giving it a fixed width and setting both margins to auto, I can now center it. You can't see the effect yet because I need to create a rule for the individual menu items. So let's do that. Nav LIA and reduce the width of them to 120 pixels and change the padding to 10 pixels on the top and bottom and 5 pixels on each side. There we are. We've now got a centered navigation menu with the individual items much narrower. I calculated the fixed width for the navigation menu by adding together 120 pixels and 5 pixels on each side. That is 130 pixels, and then inherited from the basic styles, we've got 1 pixel margin on either side, so it's a total of 132 pixels. There are 5 menu items, so that makes 660 pixels. Now obviously this isn't going to work on a much narrower screen, but the values will be overridden later by @media rules for smaller screens. So there's still a long way to go, but we've made a good start. The Tozai Hotel website has 2 pages that consist of a single column. The main content area on index.html has an ID hero. Let's just select that in the tag selector and choose the hero rule in the CSS styles panel, and you can see it has a fixed width of 896 pixels in the basic style sheet. This was done to ensure that the background image and text were positioned correctly in relationship to each other. But the tablet layout is flexible, so we need to change that. Let's first go into Live View and then use the window size menu by clicking next to multi-screen and changing that to tablet so we can follow what's happening, and select Tablet CSS in the Related Files toolbar. Now I'm going to add a rule for the hero div. And let's just update Live View. Now you can see that what has happened here is that I've now got a much narrower div, but it's also affected my text. So let's change the text. That's for the paragraph, so it'll be hero P. And change the padding on the right to 410 pixels. That's looking a bit better, but we now need to deal with the heading, which is an H2 heading inside the hero div, so hero H2. And we need to remove the padding on the right. So padding right 0. So it now fits nicely. Let me just explain the rules that I've created in the hero style rule. I'll just collapse that so that we've got a better view of the hero div in live view. What I've done is I've made both the width and the height auto, so it's now completely flexible, and it's centered within the wrapper div by giving it 10 pixels of margin on the left and right hand sides. The smaller version of this background image is 279 pixels high, so I've given the div a min height of the same value. And background position 265 pixels. If you specify only one value for background position, that means it's the horizontal position, and the other vertical position will automatically be centered. So it puts the background image 265 pixels from the left of the div and centers it vertically automatically. So index.html is now pretty much ready for being displayed on tablets. So let's take a look at rooms.html, which is also a single column page. Go into live view and switch to the tablet size in the window sizes menu. And you can see that this div has automatically resized because its position and its size is controlled by the margins on either side rather than the fixed width. But we do have a problem with this image here, so let's fix that. To fix it, we need to go out of live view first and then select the image in design view, and you can see that it's got a width of 600 pixels and a height of 399. What I'm going to do is to use CSS to control the width, but if I leave the height in here, the image will become distorted when it's resized using CSS. So I'm going to delete the height. So it's just got a fixed width of 600 pixels. And that width will be applied by desktop browsers, but in other devices which use media queries, the value, that the width will be controlled by the CSS style sheet. Notice that in the tag selector here it says image float right, image large. And you can see from the tooltip that it has both the float right and image large classes. So in the style sheet, the tablet style sheet, I need to create a style rule like this. Float right img large. And notice that there is no space between the float right and the period of img large. That's because I want to apply this rule to an element that has both the float right and img large classes. And the width will be 450 pixels. And you can see that immediately in design view the image has been resized, and because it doesn't have the height in the underlying HTML markup, it has retained its aspect ratio. The single column div has a class called content wide. I just want to make a few changes to its margins and padding to make a little bit more room on a tablet device. Let's just fix that. Content wide. And we'll just look at that in live view. And so everything is now nicely laid out for that single column page. So the tablet layout for the Tozai Hotel website is beginning to make good progress. The basic styles for the Tozai Hotel website display 3 pages in a 2-column layout. This sidebar on the right is in a div with the class aside. If I just select that in the CSS styles panel, you can see that it's got a left margin of 720 pixels. And the main content area is in a div which has the class content medium. And that is floated left into the wide margin which has been created by the aside div. For the tablet layout, what I want to do is this. Make a single column layout and move the sidebar down to the bottom. So let's see how we do that by changing the style rules in the tablet CSS style sheet. I've gone back to my original page. I want to switch on live view and also select tablet from the window sizes menu so we can see what is going on. You can see at the moment that the sidebar is outside of the main area, so we need to move it down to the bottom. Let's open tablet CSS and I'll just reduce that in size so we've got more room to see what's going on. The first thing I need to do is to create a style for content medium which stops it floating. I also need to make the width auto because when you float something it has to have a fixed width. I don't want the width to be fixed anymore because this is a flexible layout for the tablets. The left margin for the aside class also needs to be changed. Make that auto too. And let's also adjust the margins and padding on either side for both classes, content medium and aside. And let's see what that does in live view. There doesn't appear to be any change, so let's just refresh live view by toggling it on and off. And now we see that we've created a bit of a problem here. The background color to the content medium div has disappeared and none of the margins or padding have been applied. And that gives me a little clue as to where the problem might be. Let's switch to the basic style sheet and somewhere around about here, there we go, there is this little rule which I have created. As the comment points out, it fixes a margin bug in Internet Explorer 6 and 7. This is the infamous double margin bug that when you add a margin to an element and float it to the same side, Internet Explorer 6 and 7 double the margin. And so the way around this is to set the display property of the floated element to inline. It doesn't affect any other browsers, but it keeps Internet Explorer 6 and 7 happy. But obviously it's creating a problem now that our content medium div is no longer being floated. So the answer to that is to select this, cut it to your clipboard, and then go to Desktop CSS. And create a content medium class and paste that little bug fix in there. We'll save all related files. And let's refresh live view, and you see that now everything has jumped back into place. Thank goodness for that. Because desktop CSS is read only by screens wider than 768 pixels, that display in line, which you've just moved to desktop CSS, will be used only by browsers that are floating that div, so everybody's kept happy. Now in the desktop version of this page, there's an image which covers the bottom of the sidebar, but now that the sidebar stretches the full width of the page, that's no longer appropriate. So I need to fix that by putting in a new definition for an image to go with this sidebar. Just quickly put it in here. We need to refresh live view. And you see what's happened is that instead of having an image at the bottom, I've created a background image which goes on the side. Let's see how those changes affect another page that uses the two-column layout. Here's the layout as it appears in the desktop version. And let's switch to tablet size using the window sizes menu. And you see that the same has happened. It's been converted into a single column. And the only problem that I can see here is with this background image of cherry blossoms. We just need to add a little bit of padding on the right of this first paragraph so that it doesn't overlap the cluster of cherry blossoms. So let's quickly fix that by opening Tablet CSS. And it's in the blossom div, and that's a heading 3, and we use an adjacent sibling combinator to affect the first paragraph. So padding right, we'll make it 90 pixels, and toggle live view on and off again. And there we are, we're no longer overlapping. Looks quite nice. And how about the final two-column page? There it is in the desktop view. Switch to tablet. Yep, it's all looking pretty good. I think the lesson there is 2 columns into 1 will go. The media query that controls the style sheet for tablets sets the minimum width at 401 pixels and the maximum width at 768 pixels. That's a considerable range, which is likely to cause problems with some devices. For a start, the navigation menu has a fixed width of 660 pixels, so it needs to be adjusted for devices that have smaller screens. Rather than create yet another style sheet, I'm going to use @media rules in combination with media queries inside the tablet style sheet. So let's switch to the tablet style sheet and go down to the bottom, and then create the @media rule. And combine it with a media query for screen and min width (401 pixels) and max width 680 pixels. Now everything in an @media rule needs to go between a pair of curly braces. So I'm going to put both braces in to start off with, otherwise I'm likely to forget the closing one and then nothing will work. The menu items are each 132 pixels wide, so I'm going to give the nav unordered list a fixed width of 396 pixels, which will give room for 3 menu items side by side. And I also need to give the menu a height, because you need to be able to push down the material which is following, because each of the menu items is floating, so otherwise the material underneath will float up as well. So the height will be 75 pixels. Now I need to give each of the menu items a little bit of margin at the bottom to keep the two rows apart. Now this is the important part of it. What I need to do is to get the fourth item and give it a large left margin. The way in which I'm going to do that is to use the nth child pseudo class. So nav li nth child 4. That will affect the fourth menu item. And the margin left will be 66 pixels. Why 66? Well, that's half the width of a menu item. So let's see how that affects live view. At the moment, the document window is 733 pixels wide, so let's narrow it. And you can see that the navigation menu is now in two rows and very neatly aligned, because we've got a fixed width and auto margins on both sides. And as it continues to decrease in size, it remains in the center. So that's going to look pretty good at any smaller width than 680 pixels. Of course, it's made a mess of the hero div. Our image is truncated and the content is in a very narrow column there. So I think that the answer to that is actually for smaller screens to get rid of this background image and just to have the text. So let's go into the style sheet again, and it's a hero div. And I'm going to make its width 87%. Set background image to none. And give it a 5 pixel margin on the top and bottom, but set the sides to auto. And in the original rule for the tablets, I created a minimum height of 279 pixels, which is the height of the image. But if the image is not going to be there, I need to cancel that min height property. And the way in which you cancel min height is to set it to 0. And then we just need to fix the paragraph inside the hero div. Change padding right to 0. Refresh live view. And you can see that the background image has now disappeared. We've just got the text and it all fits in rather neatly there. But if we widen the window, we've now gone beyond 680 pixels, where it's 697. That background image comes back. So the media queries and the @media rule are working very nicely together. The process of creating styles for mobile phones is exactly the same as for tablets. The only difference is that you're dealing with a much narrower width, so it's mainly a question of adjusting margins, padding and font sizes. I don't intend to go through the whole process, but just concentrate on a couple of important points, mainly reorganizing the navigation menu and dealing with inline images like this, which will probably be too big for most mobile phones. So let's open the phone style sheet. I'll just quickly add a couple of basic styles. The first one is for the wrapper. The width of the wrapper will be 100%, but we've got a slightly smaller background image for the banner. And then we need to change the size of the font in the heading and in a couple of headings. The important thing that I need to do is to deal with the navigation. So it's the nav ID, and the width will be 308 pixels. The idea is that I'm targeting smartphones which are normally about 320 pixels wide, so this gives a little bit of margin on both sides. So there'll be 0 margin on top of the nav unordered list, but auto on both sides and 5 pixels underneath. And I'm using the last child pseudo class to position the last of the menu items. The way I've designed it is that there will be 2 menu items side by side, so that the last one needs to be centered. So to do that, we give it a margin left of 74 pixels. So let's turn on live view and select a 380 by 420 smartphone. So there's the menu nicely redesigned for the much smaller screen of a smartphone. Now let's just exit live view and return the screen to its full size. What I need to do is to deal with these images because they're going to be far too big in a smartphone. So the first thing I need to do is to remove the height. The reason for doing that is that I'm going to control the width of the images using CSS, and by doing so, if I leave the height in the underlying HTML markup, the images will become distorted when the width is changed by CSS. The inline images are in classes called float left and float right, so I'll create a rule for float left and float right. And what I want to do is to stop the images floating. So it'll be float none. And then I will set them to have a maximum width of 290 pixels. So that will fit within the 320 pixel size of an average smartphone screen. And I want them to display as blocks. And to have a margin at the top and bottom of 0.5 m, 0.5 m, and auto for the horizontal margins. As a result, they'll be centered. So let's just turn on live view again and go back to the smartphone size. Now the reason that this is happening is because I've not yet made the changes to the rest of the styles. We've still got the original styles from the basic style sheet cascading through, so let's just quickly fix that. And I need to create a style rule for the content wide, content medium, and aside classes. and we're going to stop them floating, give them an automatic width, and then make some changes to the margins and padding. And just refresh live view by clicking it on and off. And there we are. The containers are no longer floating, their automatic width, and you can now see that the images sit nicely in the middle of the columns, and they're no longer the original width, which would have been far too much for a smartphone. I've added other style rules in the files in the Torsai Hotel Finish folder, but I've covered all the main points in this series of videos. I hope you've enjoyed this excursion into optimizing sites for multiple devices using media queries.